So let's talk about your environmental science class. First off, what all does environmental science entail? What is environmental science, and then what are some unique features about this class?
So environmental science is actually an incredibly broad class. So it's not actually just science. We do learn science. So we talk about geology and systems in nature and animals and ecosystems and all of that. But we also bring in, there's a lot of politics, because there's laws that are passed about the environment and how that affects our everyday lives. There's also geopolitics. So when water is a scarce resource, we have to talk about how that affects how different countries interact with each other, how that affects the international scene. And we also talk about history, because what's happened in history greatly affects our environment today. So the Industrial Revolution obviously is a huge part of how our environment is shaped today. And so that's probably my favorite thing about teaching environmental science is it gives me the chance to kind of step out of just science teacher and touch on all kinds of topics and things that are really relevant, because students end up learning about things that are happening right now in their communities and how that affects them and how that's going to affect their future and their community's future and how they can be a part of that.
Yeah, well, and that was my next question for you, because I loved on your course description on the AIM Academy page, just how it mentions that your classes really involve your students in their communities. Can you tell us a little bit more of like, what does that look like, and what are some of the ways your students have become involved with their communities through these classes?
Sure. So one of the reasons I love homeschooling is we're not stuck in a classroom for 8 hours a day. We actually get to get out in the real world and interact.
Yes.
And so one thing I do in my environmental science classes, in my high school environmental science class, we cover 6 units, and 3 units have exams, and then the other 3 units I use projects as a way of gauging how much students have learned. And so the first project they do, they actually go out in their own community and they find an invasive species. And it could be a plant, it could be an animal. I've had one student was in Hawaii, and mongoose were an invasive species there.
Oh, wow.
I've had students who had plants that were invasive species. The lanternfly here in Pennsylvania is really big. And so they get to find something that is directly impacting their community, and they research it and they learn about where it came from, why it came. Like the mongoose, I think, is really neat because it was introduced to Hawaii to control rats, but rats and mongoose don't have the same sleep cycle. One's diurnal and one's nocturnal. So they ended up
work.
It didn't work. It didn't control the problem. It actually created a new problem. And that actually happens a lot. And so students get to learn about the history of whatever that species is and how it was introduced and what efforts are being made to curb it, how it can be controlled. And so they have to make a presentation of some sort, like a poster or a video. They go out and they talk with local authorities about what's being done in their community. And then I even offer for extra credit if they can arrange to go out and remove, like work on an area, removing whatever that invasive species is. Obviously that's more for plants and bugs, but so I've had students who they had their own land, their parents owned farmland, and they went out and they removed invasive species from a couple acres of their own property.
That is so cool.
And it's really neat because then they make contacts in the community and they get to learn. There are people whose jobs are working with these kinds of problems in the community and what that looks like. So
it goes beyond science, and you're doing problem solving, you're doing communication skills. Like that's really
service.
Yeah, community service, absolutely.
So it worked out really well. I've been really impressed with what students have come up with, and I'm always blown away by how students manage to come up with.
Do they share their projects then that they do together?
Yes.
Oh, that's so
And
neat.
so that's actually another great aspect of the class online. So if you're in a local class, like if I was teaching this here in Pennsylvania, we would just be talking about invasive species for Pennsylvania. Whereas I have students, I've had them all over the country, some even in other countries. And so they get to bring to the class what they've learned and teach everybody else about their own invasive species. And everybody learns from each other and they get a chance to teach, which I think is really the best way to learn. Is when you have to teach something, you really have to know it. So in order to
Yes.
show that they demonstrate that they've learned, they have to come in and present on whatever their topic is. And so everybody ends up benefiting from that kind of an assignment.